Hello and welcome to Knowledge Area 4 of the course on Africa in the Global Context, a course coded OIL 103 that is offered by the Department of Political Science and Public Administration. The focus of this knowledge area is on the economic situation in Africa, and I have decided to term it as Africa's poverty and the politics of aid. My name is Miraji Kitiwa. Poverty in Africa can be discussed in both theoretical and empirical terms. And there are some efforts to alleviate poverty in Africa since its independence in the 1960s. These would include the import substitution industrialization of the 1970s, as well as the IMF World Bank supported structural adjustment programs. In this section, we'll also see the Africa intra-trade and extra-trade arrangements. Let's first see what's poverty in Africa. You know, poverty is the oldest and most resistant virus that brings about a devastating disease in the third world or developing countries. Its rate of killing cannot be compared to any disease from the genesis of mankind. It is the worse than malaria or HIV, AIDS, which are claimed to be the highest killer diseases, and even worse than Ebola that has been claiming lives in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, and its neighboring countries. Poverty in Africa is caused by a number of factors. The leading causes are corruption and poor governance, limited employment opportunities, poor infrastructure, poor resource usage, wars, unending conflicts, poor World Bank and IMF policies, among others. The poverty situation in sub-Saharan Africa and countries is precarious given the percentage of people living below poverty line, more so when compared with other regions of the world. The use of socio-economic indicators like per capita income, life expectancy at birth, years of life, access to healthcare services, access to safe water, access to education, and access to sanitation facilities also depicts the extent of poverty in sub-Saharan Africa compared to other regions of the world. The rate of poverty in sub-Saharan Africa has not shown any remarkable reduction when viewed from these indicators and when compared with other continents of the world, be it Asia, Latin America, Australia, not to mention, not even to compare with Europe and far away from North America. Economically, this is also the region that has witnessed more macroeconomic instability and poor economic performance than any other region in the world due to high rate of corruption, also due to political patronage, political instability, and nepotism, the technical know-how, not know-how. For instance, since the mid-1980s, countries like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, then Congo, and later changed into Zaire, Uganda, and Somalia have been at war, while Sierra Leone, Rwanda, Burundi, Liberia, and Cote d'Ivoire are either recovering from years of war or are just making efforts to resolve their conflicts. The World Bank established other factors behind Africa's poverty, like structural adjustment reforms that have had negative effects on the well-being of Africans, external debts overhang, price instability, increase in unemployment, and fall in the purchasing power of the people and the causes of poverty in the continent. Other reasons include inadequate physical assets such as land and capital, minimum access to credit facilities, inadequate access to social services like safe water, low endowment of human capital, increase in the rate of social discrimination and exclusion, mostly against women and other disadvantaged groups, as well as continuous political instability. Viewing poverty in Africa is the same as viewing the economic situation. As I have said, in summary, I could say Africa is characterized by poverty. It's the poorest of all. It's the least developed region in the world, with low economic base and high population growth. The birth rate is so high, you see, and added to the countries of Africa with structural adjustment program. The aim was to reduce government spending, to cut down food subsidies and encourage private sector. This failed also. The roots of African poverty also may include the environmental limitations, as well as the historical slavery and colonialism. In brief, you can say that Africa has most of the failed development policies, including economic nationalism of the early days of independence, which had been inefficient, and the continent has been often corrupt, with government which take over a large segment of the economy. When we talk of corruption, Africa has been ravaged with this disease. There is what we may call kleptocracy. This is the state where corruption is so institutionalized by politicians and government bureaucrats. And these politicians and government bureaucrats take huge percentage of the country's wealth. As a result, we can imagine it's 10 problems that hinder development in Africa. These problems include poverty, disease, internal ethnic problems, illiteracy associated with poor education, government instability. The governments have the weak institutional establishments, and sometimes with these dictatorships and military junta, military rule. There is also lack of infrastructure, health infrastructure, road networks, and all other sorts, education infrastructure and the like. There is also kind of environmental problem. There is less concern on the future generation in Africa. There has been a depletion of the forests in order to clear land for agricultural activities without taking regard of what the future will be like. Another problem affecting development in Africa is the culture of single product economies. Find that most of the societies in Africa produce a single crop, say maize or cotton or cocoa, and nothing else. Other societies produce tobacco, and they do not deal with any other thing else. The other problem is related to brain drain. Brain drain is when those literate individuals are either voluntarily or involuntarily are shipped to other regions, and which results into the weakness of human resources in the African continent and the enrichment of other continents with the human resources from Africa. The other problem affecting development in Africa is the peripheral relative location. Africa has always been pushed to the margins of every scene in the economy. It is in the peripheral location compared to other regions of the world. This is a caricature of how Africa, most African people live. The grass-thatched house with poor meals, with poor sanitation, with poor clothing, and all sorts of negative life. However, there are efforts towards alleviating poverty in Africa. These have been tried again and again, but the problems still live on. So the problem of poverty and how to reduce it remain the most pressing dilemma in the international development debate today. And more specifically, two questions are at the heart of much of academic research and public policy for development. And these questions are, what is it that makes sub-Saharan Africa the poorest region in the world? And the second is, what can be done to deliver the sustainable and broad-based economic growth required to address this? As I said earlier, in the 1970s, sometimes 10 years after independence, African countries tried to implement what was called the import substitution industrialization. But 20 years later, all the industries which were established in order to substitute the importation of manufactured goods collapsed or were taken over by individuals and they failed. Also, Africa tried to implement the World Bank and IMF supported structural adjustment programs and the economic recovery programs in order to cut down the government costs through retrenchment and privatization of formerly public-owned industries and the like. But all this proved failure. Again, the Millennium Development Goals, which were proclaimed in 2000, failed to reduce the extreme poverty in Africa, whose target was to reduce extreme poverty by half, but they failed. And the deadline of the same was 2015, which is gone by. And now new things have been proclaimed as targets for 2030, 15 years to come, which we call the Sustainable Development Goals. But when the Sustainable Development Goals were announced in 2015, it was generally clear that success on Sustainable Development Goal number 1, that is eradicating extreme poverty for all in the world by 2030, depended on Africa's performance. Without Africa's performance, then this Sustainable Development Goal number 1 is unlikely to be achieved. And the recent forecasts from the United Nations and the World Bank suggest that Africa is not going to make it. This is fantastic. The report on accelerating poverty reduction in Africa, which was published this year, 2019, says the share of Africans living in extreme poverty has fallen substantially from 54% in 1990 to 41% in 2015. So within 25 years, the share of Africans living in extreme poverty has fallen by 13%, from 54% in 1990 to 41% in 2015. But remember again the problem of high fertility rate, population growth. Due to high population growth during the same period, I mean from 1990 to 2015, the same period, the number of poor people in Africa has actually increased from 278 million in 1990 to 413 million in 2015. So in terms of percentage, the share of Africans living in extreme poverty has fallen down, has decreased. But in terms of number, the number of poor people in Africa has increased almost by 1/3. So if circumstances remain the same, the poverty rate is expected to decline to 23% only by 2030. And globally, global poverty will become increasing in Africa, rising from 55% in 2015 to 90% in 2030. This is according to the report on accelerating poverty reduction in Africa, which was published in 2019. You see, the report says 82% of people living in extreme poverty in Africa live in rural areas and earn what little money they have, primarily from farming and other small-scale activities. Combined with fragile and conflict-affected states, the societies have notably higher poverty rates and lack of education, health, and skills, as well as persistent inequality between the men and the women, make poverty reduction harder to achieve. So Africa is in a poverty trap, to use the word of Jeffrey Sachs, who published a book on the end of poverty in 2005. And the only hopeful sign is that many independent Africans themselves are increasingly learning the economics of how to get rich rather than of how to stay poor. What about African intra-regional trade as well as extra-regional trade? International trade at regional level appears to be more advanced than at global scale. And some intra-regional trading groups in Africa include the Southern African Development Community, the Common Market for Southern Africa, the Western African Economic and Monetary Union, the East African Community, and the South African Customs Union, just to mention a few. There are some others like the Maghreb Union with some trade arrangements. But there are questions regarding the future of these regional trading groups, because the role of the regional blocs is quite unclear. It's opaque over there. There are some optimist views that such regional trading groups will serve as stepping stones and provide a path towards integrating world regions. But the pessimists' view say that these regional trading groups will become increasingly closed trading areas, and competition among the blocs will cause a breakdown of African trade relations and the construction of higher trade barriers among the sub-regional blocs, and hence undermining the African continental efforts of making Africa one market for all Africans. What can we propose as strategies towards development cooperation and international trade? First, trade reforms is very necessary. It is very necessary to adopt the measures that improve access for all products of export interest to African countries, and especially to the markets of developed countries, by means of reducing or even eliminating the tariffs and non-tariff barriers in the developed countries to allow for the access of the products from Africa. Another strategy will be the monetary reform. You know, Africa should also be fully involved in the control of the international financial liberalization, including the speculative and volatile financial flows, rather than being caught flat-footed. Third, we would call for the institutional reforms. You know, Africa's participation in the decision-making of the International Financial Institution and even in the World Trade Organization is very low. So there should be Africa's participation in those decision-making organs so as to ensure a more democratic and fair international trade for all. Fourth, we would suggest for economic modernization. You know, the developed countries should assist in modernizing the economies of the South. Thus, technology transfer and increase in industrial production should be at the fore, as it should be the focus in order to improve the economies and the trade capabilities of the countries of the South, Africa included. Fifth, we would call for political and economic sovereignty. To date, Africa appears to be less sovereign in terms of politics and economics. That the continent should be assured of the right to control its own resources, the minerals, the forests, the wildlife, the water resources, and to choose its own form of government. In other words, there should be non-interference in the internal affairs of individual states by the developed countries. Sixth, greater labor migration should be allowed. That means more freedom should be given for African workers to seek employment in the developed countries. Just like what it is with the capital flow from the developed countries to Africa. And last, there should be the elimination of economic coercion. You know, the developed countries should avoid using sanctions as a tool to punish and control Africa. Equally important is on economic aid. You know, working towards meeting the United Nations foreign aid target of 0.7% of the GNP of the developed countries should be the target. To date, only 5 economically developed countries, which are Denmark, Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, have met the target. And they deserve credit for that. Also important is on debt relief. If at all the developed countries consider Africans as human, then both the developed countries and the international financial institutions should work towards outright cancellation of the unsustainable debts of the least developed countries, including those of Africa. Yes, some efforts were made towards debt relief among African countries through what we call the heavily indebted poor countries debt relief program. I have borrowed a caricature of how trade and the resources are shared over the world. You could see that at the top there are the white people, the Europeans, those from the north, who enjoy a lot of resources, followed by the second-tier states, say India, China, Brazil, Turkey, and others of the like, followed by, say, Singapore and other countries who share a little which is poured by the rich countries. Then followed by other poor countries of the 5th level. And Africa is at the lower level there, enjoying nothing. And with the state of poverty on its heart. Thank you.